you everyone who's joining us for the first time, and those that this is their third rodeo. Welcome back. Again, the purpose of this forum is for attending firms and practitioners to share best practices for firm operations, staff well-being, and project delivery during this unprecedented time. It's a forum for our members to share concerns, challenges, and any of the requests you might have for the AIA right now. We also want to make sure that the resources on COVID-19 are available and understandable to you. I would recommend that you visit the AIA website, where we have links to not just kind of local, but also to California and national resources as it relates to business, human resources, and any other kind of efforts that are underway by the entire Institute. With that, I would just like to say that I had the pleasure of meeting Tim Hawk for the first time. I guess it was mid-February. I like to call it in the pre-COVID era. Probably it was the last trip I took at Grassroots in New Orleans. And I was on a panel that he moderated that we talked about architect advocacy. It was a great opportunity. We had a lot of attendees, and I will remember that as a great experience for myself, being first timer at Grassroots. So Timothy Hawk, FAIA, he is a 2019 to 2021 at-large director, AIA National and Chair, AIA Government Advocacy Committee, and a principal at WSA. As an AIA leader and innovative practitioner, Timothy Hawk has increased design awareness and advanced knowledge exchange among architects and allied professionals through improved digital access, collaborative models, and educational programming. He is president of WSA Studio in Columbus, Ohio. The firm partners with clients to design spaces that drive organizational change and attract top-tier talent and build community. Many of the firm's projects are widely recognized for design excellence. And as a community leader, Tim has served as the president of the Knowlton School of Architecture Alumni Society and as a founding member of the board of the Columbus Center for Architecture and Design. And so with that, Tim Hawk.
Thank you, Greg. Wow, I sound pretty important. I'm kind of impressed myself with my credentials. I wish I get that kind of an introduction all the time. Anyway, thank you for having me very much. Myself, I and many of my peers on the board are really trying to do our best to get out and talk to all of the members and seek input from you, and also share the things that we're doing. So today I'm going to talk about three topics related to the COVID-19 pandemic response. I think they should help you as an architect in practice, and also sort of as an architect in your community. So as I go through, I will provide some information, and if you need any follow-up information after the presentation, I'd be happy to send it to you. A few weeks ago, it's actually been 4 or 5 weeks ago, the National Board convened real quickly to try to figure out how we wanted to help architects in this time of need. And one of the things we did immediately was sort of quickly, so we're all dealing with change within our practice. And many of us were beginning to work from home or setting up our practices at home, and we had lots of logistical hurdles. But the board really felt our highest priority probably needed to be helping with making our communities ready for disasters to occur. So the good fortune of being on the board is you have architects from all around the country. We have a few, one who's actually in New York City, and one in Boston, and the East Coast was sort of on the front end of a lot of the issues that erupted with the pandemic. Of course, Seattle, the West Coast was there as well, Seattle and LA and San Francisco. But in many ways, as a person who practices in the heartland, in the flyover states, we recognize that many of our members would not be able to understand why and how they needed to mobilize people in their communities. So President Jane Frederick set up 3 task forces to help us address disaster preparedness. The first one was focused on educational content and knowledge, and really focused, brought together leading architects within the healthcare realm to collect best practices and share knowledge. And what's come out of that, which has been promoted pretty well in the last week, is ArchiMap. So on the AIA.org website, there is a repository for best practices. And as you, as a practitioner, or your peers begin to have things that you're doing to help out in your communities, there is an opportunity for you to deposit that information and share those practices with others. So that's kind of an interesting tool that was set up. The other thing that we did, she set up a secondary task force, and this task force really had to do with trying to mobilize our profession and actually the AIA. And we established a guideline document that was sent out to all components, and we established some templates for how you might want to communicate with people, leaders in your community, and how you might want to collect data in order to get information and be a connector in your community to the leaders. So I know, for instance, in my state, we were able to collect a list of 85 top tier architects who focus on healthcare. We have a really large presence of NBBJ in Columbus, with a significant number of healthcare architects, and Moody Nolan and other larger firms that focus on this, and as well as small practitioners. These are all collected into a list. And just as the list was being finalized, a few weeks back, I received a call from the state architect's office, and they were inquiring about whether we had access to information that they could share with the Adjutant General's office, because the Army Corps of Engineers had asked, and our governor had set up the Ohio National Guard as the conduit to help provide emergency overflow areas in the cities of Toledo, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. And so we actually had that at our fingertips and ready. And it was sort of a proud moment, because we felt like we'd been able to help connect architects to the greater good. The third task force is really working quite heavily right now. And what they're doing is looking at business continuity. So you've shared through AIA LA, AIA California, and National. You have access to resources that are on the website, which help you with business continuity plans. And there has been quite a bit of information that's been shared and knowledge that's been shared in that realm. But it really, a lot of it has to do with now, and how are we coping now? So at the national level, our third task force is really focusing on how we can help architects cope more long-term. We all know that this is not a short-term issue for us as architects. The economy has been impacted, practice has been disrupted, and capital expenditures will be different. What our clients choose to patronize, the patrons will be putting money into different things. And so we're beginning to try to figure out how we can help mobilize architects to be more impactful in the future. So those are the first 3 things we did. We developed the 3 task forces. One is content driven, one's about connection, and the third one really has to do with future preparation for business continuity and practice continuity. The other thing that's happened is, I have to tell you, I cannot say more positive things about the advocacy team at the national level and their pivot that they made in the last 2 months to mobilize to help get our voice heard and represented on Capitol Hill in relationship to the bills that have passed for economic relief. So by now, hopefully most of you have heard about the CARES Act, which was signed into legislation a week and a half or 2 weeks ago now. And that was the third bill. We advocated for a first and second, which provided relief and some changes to unemployment law. And then the third bill is the really large relief bill. And that relief bill has some interesting components and parts to it. And last week, AIA National had our advocacy team had a webinar which focused on that. If you go to AIAU on the website, you can find that webinar. It's been recorded, and I think it's really helpful. It gives a detailed accounting of the CARES Act. But importantly, I think it's really important to kind of share some of the things beyond what is sort of the top billing. So there is a paycheck protection program, and I manage and run a 26-person firm here in Columbus, and we have had about 25% of our work go on the slowdown. It's not terminated yet, but it's slowing down. And so we actually applied for this loan last week, and my banker sent me a note today and said that our loan has been approved and we'll be closing on it this week. So this loan will, for me, I'm just sort of speaking about me right now, it's going to provide 2 months of payroll that will be forgiven, which is kind of amazing and gives me a sense of comfort, because as a firm leader, I know that our issue is not now, because we build what the money we're receiving today in April, we may have billed in February or March. And the work we're billing this week is for work we've done in the last month or so. The slowdown in our billings and our cash flow more likely will occur this summer or even early fall. So we're hoping that this relief during May and June, the 2 months of payroll relief that will come through this CARES Act paycheck protection program, we're hoping that that can help us kind of get through the worst part of this slowdown. Any firm under 500 individuals is eligible to apply for this. You would just call any qualified SBA lending bank. Most banks that you work with probably are on the list. And my banker indicated there are 56,000 additional banks that are being approved by the SBA. So there's money in there, hopefully for everyone. There's $349 billion that's being allocated through December of 2020. $349 billion. Our advocacy team and working with folks in Washington, they honestly believe it will not be enough money. And so there is another bill that's being prepared right now. So we're calling this bill number 4. And this bill will probably address additional relief. So it will hopefully address and include relief for 501c6s like we are. So the AIA and our employees are not able to be, we're not able to borrow money through this existing plan. So the existing plan does include 501cs, 501c3s, 501c19s, tribal communities, sole proprietors, and such, but it does not include 501c6s. So we are lobbying heavily for that, because we have heard that AIALA, you have employees and you're going to be hard hit by this. And same thing with Californian, et cetera. So I wanted you to know as AIA members that we're doing that to help our association as well. One of the things that they do as part of this program is you do have to fill out quite a bit of information. And basically they take, you'll provide your payroll. You actually provide, if you have any kind of 401k matching safe harbor contributions, you include those. If you have any kind of healthcare insurance benefits that you provide for your employees, you can include those. And they all add up to, and it's based upon 2019 data. So you have to have all your data in order from 2019, and then that information, you take 2.5 times that average payroll and benefits package, less some of the taxes and such. And that's what they end up actually giving you. They give that to you. And if you can use it in 8 weeks, you're good. The other thing that's kind of interesting that's within the CARES Act that people are not aware of is there is, well, first of all, there are loans that are also available for employees that are mid-sized, between 500 and 10,000 employees. So these mid-sized businesses can get 6 months of 0 interest loans, and they can get, and then they convert to a 2% per annum rate after that. There's also a refund in the works for payroll tax credit for 50% of the wages, and that'll come through a later credit that you'll get as a sort of a refund. But really interesting is that each individual is to be compensated. And I'm sure you've all heard that everyone who makes less than $75,000 will receive $1,200. But there is some, so we, as a board member, we're beginning to recognize the incredible impact that this is having on students of architecture and the emerging professional population. So imagine being a 5th year or 6th year student about to graduate with the excitement of entering the profession, and there are no opportunities, or the opportunities are delayed. So we recognize that this is a huge issue. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up as part of the CARES Act is, for instance, once you get your loan and the government helps you out, my goal is to turn around and help my emerging professionals. They have a opportunity for us to provide payments on student loans. And those payments would come as tax-free, up to $5,200 that we can provide in this calendar year. So imagine being able to bonus some of your emerging professionals $1,000 towards their 501 or towards their loans or something like that. I think that would be a great thing to do. So there is a new bill that we're beginning to lobby on Capitol Hill, and it has to do with infrastructure. So when I sent out a letter about our lobbying to the legislature about the First Relief Act, I will share with you that we received quite a few emails back from our members who felt that our language was a bit inappropriate or that the timing was not right, because we included language and said we want to lobby for relief, for economic relief, but we also want investments in infrastructure. And the reason we did that is we're trying to drive economic opportunities for our members. Some members felt that that was a little tone deaf, considering we have huge, and that we should be only focusing on economic relief. So we did pivot in our lobbying, and honestly, the CARES Act bill is totally about relief. And like I said, the 4th bill will be about relief as well, as far as we can see. But there is a 5th bill that is being contemplated. And this bill is intended to be a true stimulus package that would provide funding for infrastructure. So there is a bill that's currently being supported by the House. Speaker Pelosi is behind it and endorsing it, and it has a significant investment in infrastructure that's both horizontal roadway, bridges, and sewerage infrastructure, as well as investment in our built environment through energy retrofits and other types of investments in what we call vertical infrastructure. So we think that this is really important, that is the way the investment goes. In December, though, prior to pre-COVID, the Senate actually was pulling together a different and distinct bill, and its focus, it was a smaller investment, and its focus was primarily on horizontal infrastructure and some waterways. You know, it had some dams and some other types of things related to waterways. So we feel it's really important, and we have begun lobbying heavily and to educate our legislators on why it's important that we invest in vertical infrastructure. And so I would ask you as AIA leaders in your communities to begin to talk about this and see how you can help out. Because we know that a lot of the lobbying on Capitol Hill is one thing, but if there's sort of a grassroots movement, it can be really important. So that's really important. So those are the second things we've done. So we've looked at disaster preparedness, and then we've done a lot of lobbying. The last thing I want to talk about really has to do with the recovery. So this year we have a really great board at National AIA. I feel really honored to be a part of it. And President Frederick appointed for a one-year sort of public member, Vivian Lofness, FAIA, who is a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh and a nationally recognized leader in environmental stewardship. And she's been really incredibly insightful in the last few weeks. And one of the things that we're talking about at the national level is, so of course we want this investment to be, we do want to reinvest in our communities, and we want economic stimulus, but we certainly don't want it to be at the expense of human and ecological health. And it seems that there is going to be a significant need in practice for architects to help assist clients to get back to where they were or to a new place that they are going. So imagine if you're a designer of schools in the fall, how will we approach repopulating schools? Are there design implications that come with this repopulation? How about if you work in the religious realm? Our congregations come together. There will be differences that may want to be addressed. And I think the architects, as architects, we're able to help prepare them for that. So those are some of the short-term practice implications that we have. But you may recall, if you've been following anything really at the national level, that last year at conference in Las Vegas, we passed a resolution with widespread support, which helps us refocus our efforts to address climate change. And we have a new strategic plan that will be reviewed actually beginning tomorrow by the board of directors. And the strategic plan in draft form stipulates climate change as our highest priority, or our priority. And so we feel in many ways a sense of strong urgency at this time to engage our members in becoming leaders within their communities. And there needs to be a shift that needs to occur. Last year, we released, at the same time, we released a blue ribbon panel report on building codes. And we were able to lobby the ICC International Code Council to allow an alternative appendix for a net zero building code to be distributed. And so we want to put a lot of energy and effort into energy. And so with that in mind, I want to share with you just a couple of the things the advocacy team has done in the last few weeks. So on March 27th, a letter was sent to Representative McKinley, who is sponsoring House Resolution 3962, which is called the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. And basically, the intent of the legislation is to increase our competitive advantage by encouraging energy reduction. However, this act has repealed Section 433, which requires, which was a real strong sort of sticking point for the AIA, because it would remove the language that would require all federal buildings to be powered by to get fossil fuels out of it, okay, by 2030. So the AIA has been pushing hard at the national level on fossil fuels. We do not want we want alternative energy sources to be considered so that we can improve our climate. On April 2nd, there was a letter that went to the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And this is regarding a bill that has to do with building technologies research and development. And here they're talking about grid modernization, and we're lobbying heavily for renewable energy to be included in it, and helping them understand how much energy buildings take. So there's a lack of awareness of how much energy buildings take, and quite often there's not even a discussion, or they don't even include buildings in the discussion. So that's sort of what we're hoping can be and should be the next topic. So we want to encourage all of us sort of come out of this recognizing that we play a really important role as we go forward, a significant role. And in my opinion, I feel we're going to be needed more than ever, which is why the other brief topic discussed is so important. In addition to my board position at AIA, I have a board position at the American Institute of Architecture Students, which is actually over in June. And I really think we have an obligation to help our students through this process, and in many ways allow them to sort of lead this conversation or inform the conversation, because I think that our new method of practice will be something that they deal with their entire careers. And for some of you, and for me, it's maybe only the next 10 or so. So those are some of the things that we've been doing, and I've gone 2 minutes over my time before we, I did pretty good because I could talk a lot. But I'd be happy to, or maybe Greg and Kareem have elected.
Actually, Tim, you're actually short on time. You could still go for like another 8 if you want to.
Okay, okay. Well, let me see, are there, I will say, if there are any questions, I would be happy to respond now.
It's a good time. And I would remind everybody to just, do the hand raise or to the chat box, those questions, so we can try and tackle it organized if we get, a series of them.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit more about the sort of the strategic plan and this future calling that AIA National is talking about. And that might actually spur some questions. So the Committee on the Environment had established a top 10 list of criteria, design criteria. In September, the National Board elevated that to not be a top 10 list of Committee on the Environment criteria, but a framework for design excellence for the entire AIA. And through discussions with leadership, we decided to prioritize 3 components as related to those top 10 priorities. Design for energy, design for economy, and design for equity and equitable communities. So they're all interrelated, and we actually have 10 of them, and you cannot really pull them apart. But we felt we needed to emphasize and begin somewhere. And so we have lots of effort that's occurred over the last 20 to 30 years in energy. So we have a running start on that. And so that's why the advocacy team is heavily engaged already in energy bills. Additionally, it's a very, very popular topic on Capitol Hill. It is in the debates. You're hearing it at the presidential level. You know, what are we going to do with energy reduction? How are we going to be a green economy? Should we be a green economy? Should we, you know, there's a tussle about it. So we have positioned ourselves as a knowledge resource within that. The second thing is that maybe not in Los Angeles, but I know in Ohio, we have a lot of education that we need to do with our client base as to the economic reason that you need to invest in a more sophisticated green solution. The investments are sometimes higher. The return is significantly more on your investment. And so we feel that there's a lot of education and energy, educational tools that need to be created. And the third thing is that California, we know, is leading the edge, unfortunately, on the lack of affordability for housing. And we have to solve this issue. We absolutely have to solve the issue. And we feel that in some ways, well, in many ways, this discussion of how you create a healthier designed environment and how you create a more environmentally respectful design solution will drive communities to be of higher quality for all people, and that the design parameters will begin to talk about how density is necessary in order to drive housing pricing to be affordable and other factors like that. So our hope is that we can hold this dialogue as we come out of this COVID-19 solution. And I guess the last thought I have on this is this. So I'll make it a little personal. So I went to school at a time when we were coming out, well, we were in a postmodern era in architecture. And I actually had, for a graduate design studio, I had Peter Eisman. So I went to Ohio State, and Peter likes football. And we have a good football team. And he would come to Columbus. It's a 1-hour flight from New York, and he actually was working on our convention center in the city here. And he would come to Columbus once a week, and he would teach us. And he was a phenomenal instructor, actually. I think he's a better teacher than he was an architect, or than he is an architect. Don't repeat that, but I just think he's a phenomenal instructor. Very inspirational, and strong theory-based studio. And our focus was really on art, architecture as an art form. We didn't really talk about the social impact of architecture, quite honestly. We talked about making space, making place, connecting the community, context, all those things. But we certainly didn't talk about architecture in relationship to the human element, nor did we discuss in any way building science. And so I kind of had this idea in the first 20 years of my practice that, we'll get our consultants to figure that out, right? We'll get the engineers to figure that out. And over the last 15, I've become so aware of how important building science is to inform design. And I feel as we come out of this COVID-19 pandemic, there will be a light on the importance of understanding building science, how we make our buildings healthier, how we make our communities stronger through good design. And I think that we have some work to do to help educate our members on these issues, because I feel probably many of us who are in positions of practice leadership were educated under the same model that I was educated under. And the future demand or need from an architect may be different. There might be a different focus. But of course, that's all me sort of looking into a crystal ball. So, Greg, questions? Will, questions?
Yeah, so maybe, I don't know if anybody has a question they either want to ask or put it to the chat box. We have about 15 or 20 minutes here to do that, but now's the time. And thank you, Tim, by the way, for all that.
You're welcome. Tony is trying to ask a question, I think. You have to unmute, Tony.
Or you can type it.
To type a question in?
There, you got it. We got your voice, Tony.
Oh, you have that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. First, I want to know, is that your real background back there?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
All right.
It's a hot gallery. It's my sister and
it's
my dad's paintings and stuff. Yeah, it's like I'm in a museum.
good. Good. Well, listen, thanks for taking the time to do this, and your the amount of time that you volunteer on this whole thing. I appreciate it. One of the things that occurs to me, and is the inequities that this whole crisis has exposed, that we knew were there but are now blatant. And the other thing is that the thing that occurred to me is obviously the things that you're talking about, and I'm the chair of the Urban Design Committee, and one of the things that we've been focusing on this past year or so are ideas about the transformation of contemporary cities to deal with the climate cliff and climate, as it sort of represents our most existential threat. But there's a lot that's going to come out of this, and hopefully we'll learn a lot in this, as a result of this horrible situation. But we do have a major election in front of us. And today, Bernie actually endorsed Biden, yes. And they somehow came to an agreement that they would be working on policy issues together, right? So they're obviously trying to put together a platform with planks that are going to cover a wide spectrum, which hopefully will end up being inclusive of the folks that are followers of Bernie. Basically, I guess the point that I'm making is that all the things that we talk about, and I think there is, the consensus within our profession is, in general, is that this issue is probably the most important thing that we can possibly address, is that we win this election. And that not only do we win this election, we replace the current administration, because we can discuss all the climate bills we want, but currently we have climate deniers. And whether they truly deny it or not, or it's motivated by other things, it doesn't really matter. We're unwinding issues that address climate change currently. So as aspirational as all these things are that we're talking about, and which are critical, we have to change the political landscape in order to implement these things. And we have to do it resoundingly, not in a 51 to 49% manner. So I would recommend to my colleagues in the profession that we get out there and we hit the streets, and it comes from the ground up, and we get out there and we make political change.
Yeah. So you've hit the nail right on the head, Tony. And we are gathering beginning Thursday with the Government Advocacy Committee, and we're going to be meeting intensively for the next 2 weeks. And we're pulling together an architect's platform, which will be shared. Well, I don't know how it's going to be shared now, but originally we were going to go to the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention. But this would be the first time ever that we've actually created a platform to engage in policy discussion during the election. I feel that that platform will be shared, and hopefully it'll give tools to everyone around the country to go be activists. And like I said before, we have to handle it from both angles, right? So I will say this: what I have learned in the last year and a half being an advocacy leader is the incredible pluralistic policy discussions that are occurring. We just never hear anything about them, okay? So it's not totally this way and that way. It's not like you have a person who's totally coal and a person who's totally alternative energy. There's a lot of dialogue that's occurring. But to your point, we do have very clearly a current administration that's pulled a lot of energy restrictions and such back. So our platform is not going to necessarily be endorsing any candidate, because honestly, we don't do that at the AIA, but it will endorse and communicate our policy interests and what we as architects feel that are really important as a way to educate all of the candidates. So I'm certain that it will include discussions on our 2030 challenge and our commitment. And it will include discussions about urban density and how we need investments in our communities. And so I'm really excited because we are going to be releasing that platform, and hopefully that will help. And if we can have you and other leaders take that and begin to have communications in your cities and states, that would be helpful. The other thing the AIA did last year, which is beginning to slowly catch on, is for years we've had a state and a state government network. And we have changed the strategy to be a state and local government network. And the reason is we recognize that we have work to do on all fronts at all scales. We need to be local, we need to be regional, and we need to be national. So if you have, and I've actually, I think I saw Nikki on here, but I've encouraged Nikki, you know, California in many ways, and in LA, your component is addressing, you are having issues that are oftentimes 3 years ahead of what will happen in Iowa, or maybe 5 to 10 years ahead. And so we need you to help us by feeding information about what's going on in California so that we can share that knowledge across the country. So I think the way we're going to be able to mobilize is by building awareness of the challenges and helping educate architects on the shifting role that we have to play. It's not going to be acceptable any longer to be a good designer. That's going to be basic stuff. But we need architects to return to a trusted advisor in their community. And the only way we're going to do that is through having knowledge of how our designs impact communities in a greater way and be able to communicate that to our civic leaders and municipal leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Well, we had a question from Will. Will, do you want to go ahead?
Oh yeah, you mentioned earlier about the $5,200 for student loan payments. Can you sort of clarify that a little bit more? That's if you're an employer and you can then therefore sort of like a payroll tax credit. Is that essentially how it works?
No, it's not really any benefit to the employer. It's really a, so you are eligible to pay an employee up to $5,250 in 2020. So let's say, Will, you're the emerging professional and I am your employer. And at the end of the year, we provide end of the year bonuses. And if you have communicated to me that you have student loan debt of $100,000, I would have an opportunity to give you $5,000, and it would be not taxed, it would be tax-free for you if you use it to pay your student loans. So that came out of the CARES Act. And I think we should be helping people recognize that this is in there because it's way down in the weeds. It's not right on the surface. And I think that, so look, I'll tell you, I am just shocked at the number of students who have student loan debt of $100,000 or more and are coming out. These are people not, you know, they're getting starting level, entry level architecture jobs. And I don't know how they can afford, you know, they're burdened and crippled by this debt. So that's one thing. The other thing is there is a bill that's in committee now. It's sponsored by two legislators from the state of Illinois. And this is a bill which would allow, so this is a little confusing, but it will allow architects or any employer who has a 401k program set up to provide a contribution, a matching contribution to that person for what they pay on their student loans. So let me explain it a little bit better. Right now, I have an employee, her name is Susan. Susan takes $500 out of every paycheck and puts it in 401k retirement plan. I can match up to 4% by the laws that are set up in my 401k program. I can match up to 4% of her salary in a safe harbor contribution. So under this legislation, if I have an employee who's choosing not to participate because they have student loan debt, instead of putting their money into the retirement plan, they can put their money to pay off their student loans. And I would match that, and it would go into their retirement plan. So we're incentivizing the young person or the person who has the debt from their loans to pay off their loans with a tax-free deduction from their paycheck, and the employer to match that and help them save towards their retirement. So these things are really, I went with 85 students from across the country to Capitol Hill last July to lobby on this behalf. And the students, honestly, they did a better job than we do at lobbying. It was amazing. They had done their homework, they were smart, they were prepared, and they have followed up. And interestingly, the legislation has been sent to, it's the bills come together, they have sponsors, it's in committee. So we're hoping that gets passed as well. Kind of back to, I think this is sort of in the same boat that Tony's talking about, which is, look, we have to advocate for our profession and our communities. And if you look at the demographics, especially now, given this economic cycle we're going to be in, there are a large number of architects who are going to be retiring. So I'm the youngest baby boomer there is, and I'm 55. So that means every baby boomer is between 55 and 72 or 73 or something like that. And the retirements are going to start increasing. We do have we actually have quite a number of architects who are becoming registered. Our numbers for the number of people who are becoming registered each year is not necessarily reducing. The problem is, demographically, there's an increasing demand for architectural services because we have American architects, I believe, we have a really great educational system, a really great quality insurance program. And so as a result, our knowledge is being exported globally. So there's an increasing demand for our services, and we're not replacing the people who are retiring. So the reason I go down this wormhole is because it's really important that we make sure these people who are coming into our profession are cared for, because we won't have anybody in the profession if we don't do something, and we could lose an entire generation. So that's a really big issue. In fact, we have a board level committee called Equity and the Future of Design. And for the last 3 to 5 years, they've been sending out and providing guides, equitable guides to practice, guides to equitable practice, and focusing on bringing together women and minorities into positions to kind of increase our pipeline, which has all really been great. And so now they've been asked to expand their mission to include this new issue of our next generation of architects. And Emily Grandstaff-Rice, my board colleague, is chairing that effort to help us figure out. And last week, she and Robert Ivy and Jane Frederick had a conference call along with other staffers at National with the AIA student board to discuss how we can work together. And as a member of that board for 3 years, that has never happened. So I was really pleased that that occurred. Will, I went way deep into that, but essentially that's sort of the reason I bring that up. That there's a lot of incentives in there for employers, right? And we oftentimes think of the AIA as helping out the me's of the world. And this is a part of that that is something that we can help educate our employers to provide a benefit to their emerging professionals.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that we're almost out of time here, so we'll let Greg wrap it up, and I'll jump back on.
Well, I just want to say thank you again to Tim. You're in a different time zone, so you're on overtime already, I guess. But of course, it's probably the norm. We have another town hall it's next week, right? Yeah, on the 20th with Ryan Kohler, and we're going to cover kind of legal aspects surrounding all of the COVID-19 things that are going on. And again, spread the word, and we welcome people to join us and ask questions. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Did you want to, is there anything else on these other dates we want to mention right now? These other, I guess there's, well, I could mention the fact that on 4/14, AIA LA Practice Committee has a Innovation in Architecture webinar. 4/15, AIA LA Building and Performance Regulations Committee, Changes to Fire Protection, Life Safety, and Accessibility. There's a software webinar on the 16th, but I'm not sure I'm following what that is in my notes. And then the 20th is the next virtual forum. So that's all I have.
Yep. Thank you so much, Greg. Yep, Greg just listed our events coming up for this week. We have a lot of virtual events for this week, and I do see that there's a few other questions in the chat box, but we will send a follow-up email, and hopefully you can get in touch with Timothy afterwards to address any of your additional questions, because we need to be conscious of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you guys join us for other virtual forums this week, and we hope to see you next week. Please remember that we would not be doing these forums, and they would not be going as well without your